Aloha and welcome to UH Manoa. My name is Jonathan Pettit from the Department of Religions and Ancient Civilizations at UH Manoa. Our Center for Chinese Studies, who's hosting this webinar today, we are comprised of more than 40 professorial ranked faculty specializing in Chinese studies across 30 disciplines and professorial schools. The Center for Chinese Studies aims to foster interdisciplinary understanding of mainland China, Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, and other Chinese-speaking societies worldwide, as well as Chinese civilization and its long connections to Hawaii. This webinar series, open and free for all, is one of the center's main conduits to engage scholars with Chinese studies worldwide. Today we have three speakers, and this is Islam in China, Religion, Mobility, State Power. So we have three speakers. Each will speak for about 20 minutes, and there'll be a Q&A session at the end of that. For participants in the room, there is a Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen that you can use for questions. So feel free to jot down any questions you have as the speakers are speaking, and don't be bashful. There's also a chat button that you can use for logistical issues. So if you're having trouble hearing or there's some kind of technical difficulties, we will be behind the scenes to help you. Before we begin, just wanted to take some time to acknowledge the director for the Center for Chinese Studies, Dr. Mingbao Yu, Associate Director Ni Zhang, and Assistant Adriana Choi. So it's through their tireless effort that this webinar and our whole series is made possible. So we also have Dr. James Frankel, who will soon be here. He teaches at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, the director for the Center for the Study of Islamic Culture. So hopefully he'll be joining soon. But until he does, I will take his role as moderator and introduce our three speakers as they come along. So our first speaker today is Ruslan Yusupov. He's a sociological anthropologist interested in understanding how Muslim communities find a place for themselves and their Islam in Chinese modernity. Ruslan is currently completing his first book manuscript, which is tentatively titled Rectifying Multiculturalism, Islam, Development, and Secularization in Contemporary China, in which explores how the scrutinizing measures today other and racialize the past development, progress, and modernization of Sinophone Muslims. Ruslan obtained his PhD from the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and he's currently based at the Weatherhead Center at Harvard. So with that, Ruslan, please.
Thank you so much. Let me share my screen and go into full mode. Continue to share. Okay. In terms of visuals, is that all okay?
Yeah, it looks great.
Yeah. Okay, great. So thank you so much for this opportunity. So this is a kind of a project that is a spin-off from my book manuscript project, but it updates it in a sense in very important ways. So in this kind of in this presentation, I will be talking about what I see the Chinese government's policies, and I see them as othering and racializing integration and development of Sinophone Muslims in China. And I will be talking specifically on the campaign of mosque rectification. So among the numerous mosques that that stand in Xining, the capital of China's northwestern Qinghai province, Wangjiazhuang is unique because it is housed in the podium of an apartment complex. Photographs from its opening in 2017 show two residential high-rises flanking the mosque's large dome and 38-meter-high minarets. In addition to prayer halls and ablution rooms, the podium also has 7,000 square meters of shopping space, madrasa classrooms, and a cafeteria salon that can be reserved for large private gatherings. But its recent photos, though, reveal that the domes and minarets are gone. What residents on the upper floor see instead are round marks left on the roof. The changes are due to the nationwide campaign to Sinicise Chinese Islam, which the authorities view to be under the influence of the so-called Arabization and Saudization trends. The campaign follows the now infamous meeting on religious work that was chaired by Xi Jinping in April 2016, where he urged religious representatives to contribute to the dreams of the Chinese dream of the national rejuvenation by merging their doctrines with Chinese culture and values. Sinicization applies to a different degree to all recognized religions in China, and that's why it leads to various forms of repression and control. But it seems to target primarily Chinese Muslims, members of the state-recognized minority nationality called the Hawai'i. In 2018, the state-managed Chinese Islamic Association issued a 5-year sinicization or sinification plan, which authorized the rectification of foreign styles in mosque architecture to align them with Chinese characteristics, highlighting Chinese elements. And so since then, thousands of mosques have since had witnessed their domes and minarets beheaded and amputated. And I'm here honored to join a number of different scholars who try to track this campaign, although it's very difficult because Chinese Muslim borderlands are inaccessible for research. Specifically also trying to understand how it spills over to different domains and to development, to an economy. Here working on building up on the work of Susan McCarthy, who is going to present here in a moment as well. So in this presentation, I seek to understand the architecture of sinicization as it takes shape through the racialization of mosques. Indeed, the campaign mirrors the destruction of historic mosques in Xinjiang, where Turkic Muslim populations are often labeled as terrorists. Both cases illustrate how Islamophobia in China is informed by the global discourses that other Islam as simply the religion of the Arabs. So by accusing the Hawai'i of architectural miscegenation, sinicization becomes another civilizing project of the party, in which, and here I paraphrase Spivak's famous term, white men saving brown women from brown men, we see this civilizing project to be a project where the Communist Party saves the Chineseness of Muslims from the Arab Islam. Yet these mosques are much more than the embodiments of alterity, and I want to argue today that any discussion of the domes and minarets' disappearance must begin from understanding how they emerged in China in the first place. As I show in this presentation, the Arab style emerged in China at the turn of the century in the context of massive urban renewal and redevelopment initiatives. These initiatives were central to the party's ambitious Open Up the West campaign, which sought to integrate its multi-ethnic hinterland with the coastline China. In Xining, for example, a grand plan for a new train station was announced to that end in 2010. And so not only Wangjiazhuang, but 2 other mosques, along with schools, stadiums, old residential compounds, were razed to the ground to make way for an airport-style terminal, high-speed rail lines, and a cluster of residential high-rises. In a desire to catch up with these changes, lest face the ever-present specter of eviction from Chinese modernity, Sinophone Muslims mobilized along the market economy and the state's ethno-religious policies to invest into the construction of their new mosques. These mosques were multi-story structures of enforced concrete that came with little cost to the government, but that dotted the increasingly vertical skyline of the multi-ethnic city with large domes and tall minarets. And so if we inject that kind of a history, then the story of the Wangjiazhuang Mosque will look something like this. So this is the photo from the Google satellite image in 2007. You see this kind of a neighborhood here in where Wangjiazhuang is situated. So you see the minaret, which is a very recent addition, but you see the mosque here in its own courtyard, and you can recognize that it has this Chinese style kind of roofs with a kind of a single ridge eaved roofs. Then in 2011, you see that the whole place has been demolished. And this is only the Wangjiazhuang village, but not only the Wangjiazhuang village, but the whole kind of a neighborhood has been demolished. This is the mosque model. As you can see, it's very much integrated, kind of a built-in into this residential compound. And then we arrive to the image of Wangjiazhuang in 2013, with which I began this presentation. So the Islamic Architecture of China book, published in 2005, for instance, refers to this style as Arab and describes it repeatedly as novel, fresh, and chic. On one occasion, it is also cited as a sign of architectural dynamism, showing that Islam does not lag behind but keeps up with the times. So the reference here is, of course, not to the Arab countries where these mosques are built in this style to invoke the kind of a historical grandeur, right? But you can see that the reference here is to new hierarchies of visibility and progress that made the previously common single floor and curved roof mosque design in China rather inconspicuous and outdated. Like Wangjiazhuang, which is literally built into an urban complex, the Arab-style mosques became the body images of Islam anticipated integration with the Reform-era modernization. They were given official recognition, they were advertised as sites of tourism, and they stood to project potency and affluence of the communities that built them. And so it is this integration, development, and progress, I would like to suggest, that the campaign today arguably racializes as Saudization and Arabization. And so my research is informed by 2 years of fieldwork and a decade of conversation with Chinese Muslims. But here, however, it is primarily based on a classified file that was leaked online by the Western press. Issued by the Syrian government, it announced the rectification of 19 out of 36 mosques standing in the city in 2020. Against the backdrop of the history of these mosques, then, I draw on the work of Jasper Puar and define the campaign of Sinicization as maiming and incapacitation. Let me show a little bit of the files that I'm working with from this document. So this document is very graphic. It is organized in terms of the before and after a comparison of mosques. And so this is the famous Nanfang Mosque, Nanguan Mosque in Xining City. This is another mosque, and I call this, as far as the Photoshop itself goes, as the graphic slides themselves go, I call it the Photoshopping Sinicization. So you can see here how the minarets and the domes disappear, but together with minarets and domes, what kind of becomes maimed is also parts of the city. So you can see here the corner of this building, it has been chipped off. These two buildings kind of slide into each other, collapse into each other. Cars photoshopped on the parking lot start to sink into the ground. And so against this kind of a spectralization of the city, the mosque roof and its minarets stand really suspiciously very flat and very smooth and untouched. This is also another image. And here you see how the city itself, the cityscape itself disappears from the view, and you are no longer able to understand the whereabouts of this mosque. And it's very confusing whether it was the mosque that was abducted from the city or it is the city that disappears from the view entirely. Quite often, if you look at these mosques as they emerged through Sinicization right now, many of them have this, what I call prosthetics of Sinicization, this additional structures that appear to be very Chinese, like gazebos and pagodas and this Chinese-style roofs. But in the project itself, in the file itself, out of 19 mosques, only one has this polychromatic bodies, and they look very alien to the place that they appear to be added to. And I see this to be articulating the major contradiction of Sinicization. It basically cover-ups the act of maiming, which is the campaign's primal scene, but it also presents this as more beautiful than the initial initial structures. Here is the image of the Wangjiazhuang Mosque itself. As you can see, also the domes and minarets disappeared in the initial plan, and it stays the same, so nothing has been added up until this point, as far as I checked today. Notice, however, that there is the minaret disappeared, but the shadow of the minaret here stays, very interestingly. And also notice the disappearance of the stamp, because the mosque design was approved by the government. So the othering of modernization, progress, and development comes very much as counterintuitive, especially given that these are the party's key legitimating claims, as we know. But scholars of Chinese ethnic politics have repeatedly shown, however, that the perceived backwardness, poverty, and underdevelopment of the minority nationalities, though acting in categorical opposition to the state's modernizing ethos, figure as active signifiers of the party's authority. So seen from this perspective, the domes and minarets display a growing disjuncture between the stereotypes that the party holds about its internal others on the one hand, and the growing advancement, progress, and development among the Hui on the other. The Wang Jiazhuang case illustrates, for instance, how religion in China effectively became an urban developer, and how the Hui became self-sufficient in Chinese modernity. And so it is these deviations that the campaign, I argue, seeks to rectify. The orientalization of development as Arabization serves as a tacit acknowledgement that the Hui became too affluent, hence too Chinese, in their participation in Chinese modernity. Beyond the obvious differences, there is indeed an uncanny family resemblance between the mosques, between these Arab-style mosques, and the residential theme parks, Sohos, Beverly Hills, Amsterdams, and themes towns that mushroomed in urban China since the turn of the century. Both are architectural simulacra that are foreign in their object of emulation, but that are specific to the Chinese context. Both are also markers of class, status, and fine living in Chinese modernity. And so the Arab-style shape-shifting of mosques, that is to say, aligns with the nationwide extent to which the Reform era has unraveled what it means to be Chinese for the nation. What cynicization finds threatening, therefore, is not only the alterity of Islam, which is certainly the case, but at the same time, its uncanny similitude. It then follows that the Hui must be racialized and reduced to the official stereotypes about them if the party is to rescue the contradictions of its narratives and maintain and restore its ruling authority over the minorities. This translates into incapacitation, impairment, and inferiority that the maimed yet open condition of the mosque so powerfully visualizes. This, I argue, is what it means for the Muslim minority to be Chinese in the age of the national rejuvenation, which is also the age of global decoupling and economic stagnation. So in the remainder of this, let me kind of focus a little bit more on this kind of a racialization narrative. In May 2020, my informants in Shadian, the place where I did 2 years of field work in Yunnan, which is thousands of miles away from Xining, shared with me a document that announced the onset of the rectification work of Arab-style mosques in the Yunnan province. And so in this document, you see that there's an internal document that addresses the officials and begins by defining the Arab-style mosques as those that feature large domes and high minarets. These mosques, it claims, have deviated from the direction of Sunnicization of Islam in China, causing adverse impacts on society. The notice then instructs the officials on how to profile them. The officials are, for instance, to detect if there are any Arab-style mosques that have been built illegally or without registration or authorization, or if there are any Arab-style mosques that pose significant safety hazards. They are also to detect if there are Arab-style mosques that are located too close together and have domes and minarets that clearly exceed the reasonable height or practical needs. So you can see that this definition of mosques as Arab style is problematic enough for its monolithic conflation of geography with phenotype. However, what is more telling is the way this phenotypical distinction is utilized to alter the officials' perceptions. For sure, they are to identify mosques as illegal, but they are also to single them out for their deviant excess, that there are too many, their redundancy, that they exceed the reasonable height, and their luxury, that they are too close to it, and their luxuriousness, that they are too close to each other. These do not come across as the markers of alterity, let alone threat, but of status, class, and comfort. The notice shows how the campaign's racializing rhetorics rewrite the history of development as what may be called the development of deviation. And so this is the narrative that the nationalist discourse repeats about Arabization of these mosques online. One such post, for instance, was published in 2017 by an avatar of a man in a military uniform, and this post remains accessible to this day. So, acknowledging the damage of the Cultural Revolution, the post says, "It wasn't until the 1990s that conditions allowed for a small number of mosques to be rebuilt in the traditional style. The people were poor, they couldn't afford to feed themselves, and were not interested in religion. Wearing ethnic dress was a luxury, and the black burqa was unaffordable either, and many believers would gather at the mosques only during festivals." The narrative stops there, and then there is a change of paragraph, and this is how it continues. "However, with the rapid economic and social development, some people started to ask the government for money and land to build and expand their mosques in large numbers. They have gone further and further, resulting in the proliferation of the Arab-style mosques, and these mosques are decorated with much splendor." So the post continues to identify the travels to Middle Eastern countries, scriptural education, and summer camps for Hawai'i Muslim youth as other signs of Arabization, and it concludes with a note about the clergy. It says, "Another new development is that the imam is now a professional, unlike in the past when he had to work in the fields and earn the living." So despite the narrative that this is obviously a security threat, notice the political economy focus of this analysis and the exclamation mark that betrays a certain contempt for these mosques.
I'll probably down to 2 more minutes or so, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. It shows how the development of deviation frames the earlier times of hardship and destitution as normative for the Hawai'i. They shouldn't be affluent, it implies, and their leadership should be represented by the peasantry, not by the urban class of intellectuals. Their mosques should only meet the bare minimum of ritual needs, and anything beyond that is excess and deviation. The contempt of splendor here functions as revealing the extent to which the Muslim minorities, in building these splendid mosques, have deviated from their so-called true selves, that is, of being peasant, of being poor, of being backward. This logic effectively denies the Hawai'i their coevalness in development and equates lagging behind with what it means for them to be Chinese. I will stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sid. At this point, I'm going to turn the mic over to our moderator, Dr. Frankel, who's making a homecoming back to Hawaii. So he teaches at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, the director for the Center for the Study of Islamic Culture. Dr. Frankel.
Yes. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm not sure which, but I'm sorry that I missed the first set. I actually got to hear Ruslan, and I'm thankful for that, but due to some technical difficulties, I wasn't able to introduce him. So it's my pleasure now to introduce a colleague, Wang Yuting, who is professor of sociology at the American University of Sharjah in the UAE. Her research focuses on Islam and Muslims in China, the Chinese diaspora in the Arab Gulf, and China's soft power in the Middle East, North Africa region. She has published extensively, including 2 monographs, Between Islam and the American Dream, an immigration Muslim community in post-9/11 America, and Chinese in Dubai, Money, Pride, and Soul Searching. That was published in 2020. So without further ado, I will let Professor Wang introduce her topic.
Thank you, James. Thank you for this very generous introduction. And actually, James is very familiar with the project I'm going to share with everyone here. This project started back in 2023, and I first presented the research at the international workshop titled Muslim Minorities and Questions of Secularity in China and Beyond, which was held at the Leipzig University in Germany. And after that, and then I worked with my co-author, Dr. Xiaojing Chai, to continue looking at how we can actually situate a Chinese Muslim in a very new topic, and then also, in a broader theoretical framework on multiple modernities. So what we have right now is an article that's forthcoming in the Journal of Chinese Religions, and it's titled Faith and Cryptocurrency, Chinese Muslim Bitcoiners in the Global Digital Economy. And usually I have colorful presentations, but then today I decided just to talk because this is a very digital topic, and then I'm just gonna go without the images. Just to, we don't have that much time, and I wanted to give you sort of a broad overview of the project, and also, share a little bit more about the research methods, because there's a lot of challenges that we have to deal with studying people who are very mobile and who exist in this, very fluid, dynamic, and transnational space. So this is not just about the article, it's also about some reflections on how to do research on minority and ethno-religious minority that sort of, have become very mobile, whether voluntarily or, or forced to. As I mentioned, and this project sort of, entered the space of the theoretical framework multiple modernities. So what we wanted to do in the first place is sort of, present a empirical study of Muslim minority in contemporary non-Western contexts, and to engage with this framework in multiple modernities, and to investigate various challenges of secularism on Islam and the Muslims. So the article presents this study looking at transnational Chinese Muslim Bitcoin entrepreneurs who operate within a multi-layered transnational network of goods, capital, services, people, and they develop a type of ethical entrepreneurship that distinguishes itself from the secular modes of transnational instrumental or maybe acquisitive practices in the modern West, whether East, whether it's capitalist or socialist. And then we wanted to sort of, better understand the complexity of Muslim subjectivities in a secular world. The article specifically is looking at the intersection of Islam, modernity, and a digital economy by looking at what we call the Chinese Muslim Bitcoin entrepreneurs. And then we actually explained what we meant by this. And then in terms of the definition of the term, we're looking at Chinese speaking Muslims, mostly the Hawai'i. The Bitcoin entrepreneurs are those who develop, manage, and also trade Bitcoin and other type of cryptocurrencies. And we wanted to address the questions of how they reconcile their Islamic faith with shifting state policies on religious affairs in China, and how they leverage cryptocurrencies to challenge global financial structures dominated by Western institutions and promote sort of alternative Islam-based economic model. And in terms of our research methods, we conducted in-depth interviews with a very small group of transnational Chinese Muslim Bitcoin investors, developers. And this had a lot to do with the difficulties of gaining access to this group. They're sort of, operating in this gray area because the different attitudes, the state attitude towards the practices, and then the operation of cryptocurrencies in China, in the West, and in the Middle East and the Muslim countries, in Southeast Asia as well. So it's not very easy to gain access, but we were able to talk to a small group of people who are who play the role of as leaders in this particular business and entrepreneurship. And we wanted to look at how they view cryptocurrencies as a tool for dismantling post-colonial financial structure. And they also actually have a big ambitious goal to foster a just, equitable society aligned with Islamic tenets. Just to give a little bit more about cryptocurrency, because I think later on we have to probably talk a little bit more and answer some questions. The concept of halal and haram, which is very essential to Chinese Muslims as a minority living in non-Islamic environments, and then it manifests in all aspects of their life. And in the modern society, it is also very central to their operation and navigation in this modern financial landscape. So in the global financial markets is heavily influenced by Western financial norms. This is what we know. And so in response to that Western domination, and also to deal with Islamic ethics and law, and Islamic finance was developed in order to sort of introduce alternative to modern Muslims and operating in this very dynamic Western-dominated financial system. But Islamic finance has faced a lot of challenges. It has sort of it's dealing with a very narrow spectrum of financial products than its conventional counterparts. So there's a lot of challenges, and it's not very effective, in terms of meeting the demand of this very the modern challenges, so to speak. And so in 2007, it is in the wake of global financial crisis. We know that Bitcoin and other types of cryptocurrencies were introduced. They were considered some sort of innovative and then decentralized methods to conduct the financial transactions and managing wealth. So it was introduced by an individual under the pseudonym Satoshi Nakamoto, with the aim of creating a decentralized system for transaction. This system allows parties to conduct transactions over a distributed network, ensuring both trust and anonymity without the need for a centralized authority to mediate the exchange. So since the development of cryptocurrencies, and we start seeing the participation of individuals and then organizations in this market, government around the world have all sorts of policies, attitudes, and these policies also evolving very throughout time. So currently, what we know is that some countries are very cautious and then have very tight regulation. For example, so for example, in China actually had an outright ban on cryptocurrencies, and then in countries like Japan, Switzerland, Canada, they are a bit more progressive. And in the Muslim world, Malaysia has considered cryptocurrencies permissible to use and trade. In Turkey, it is legal to buy. And then in the Arab Gulf countries, especially the UAE, UAE has a very progressive stance towards cryptocurrencies. It permits purchase, sell, trade, and all sorts of activities surrounding cryptocurrencies. So where the Chinese Muslim come into this picture, it's interesting because in my other studies, and then I've written about the presence of Chinese Muslims in the Arab Gulf, especially UAE, given the global trade, the status of Dubai as a global trade hub. So very naturally, and you start seeing more Chinese Muslims, especially those entrepreneurial ones, gather in the transnational space here in Dubai. So the Chinese Muslims, and then also it's inevitable that when UAE has a very liberal currency policy and have an open market, and then they are also in search of alternative methods to deal with financial transactions, and then so they just emerge out of this landscape, the finance landscape, and so this is where our study started. Very, very briefly, just to give you a little bit more background about our research methods and then the interviewees. And we used the snowball sampling. We started with one person who was very enthusiastic in sharing his insight about cryptocurrency with us. And then from there, we contacted more. And Dr. Xiaojun Cai was very instrumental in reaching out to these interviewees. And then so we look at our interviewees, and it's very interesting that they mainly come from generations born and raised during China's reform era, spanning from the late 1970s to 1990s. It is a period of time marked by rapid economic growth, significant improvement in quality of life in China, and increased international exchanges. And these individuals are actually well educated. They hold postgraduate degrees in varied disciplines, for example, economics, business management, Islamic finance, computer science, media studies, international relations, so on and so forth. And although they are mostly raised in traditional Chinese Muslim families from northwestern provinces, they actually received a secular education. Some of them lived and worked in Southeast Asia, such as Malaysia or Middle East, and some also, spent time in Africa and North America. So they're very, very transnational. Their exposure to, the secular education, also global Muslim Ummah, a very diverse one, enrich their understanding of global financial interactions. Yet, they all have manifested a very strong identification with Islamic traditions, especially in terms of beliefs and religious knowledge. And in fact, in 2020, this group of Chinese Muslims developed a particular type of cryptocurrency. They call it the Qingzhenbi, and they have launched it on the platform called Kitmir. And then from there, they have gained a subscriber of about 10,000 to 50,000. But then the core founders and investor developers are about, less than 100. So it's a very tiny group, but a very interesting group because they are sort of treading some very new and very unknown territories in the fintech. Okay, so I'm just going to share some of these key themes that emerge out of their interviews. And so we had this very in-depth interviews ranging from 1.5 to 2.5 hours per person. And we also had opportunities to observe these Chinese Muslim Bitcoiners in Dubai's large Bitcoin conferences events. So it was very interesting and a very insightful process for us as researchers as well. So there's several themes that emerge out of these transcripts, and the interviews were conducted in Chinese, and then we transcribed the interviews and then translated them semantically into English. So sort of trying to understand how they feel about their involvement in cryptocurrency, which is more or less controversial depending on where you are. So, for example, the first theme has to do with their attitude towards Western-dominated global structure. So overall, the respondents expressed unanimously a strong sense of disillusionment with Western-dominated global order. They see this global order as perpetuating economic dependency, and it stifles the potential for independent development in Muslim-majority regions. They argue that Western influence has infiltrated the socio-economic system of the Muslim world, embedding layers of political and economic subordination. And this perspective reflects their conviction that Western economic hegemony, symbolized by the dominance of US dollar, fundamentally restricts the autonomy and the competitiveness of the Muslim world. From their perspective, the invention of crypto technology is a historic moment for Muslims and all those who were subject to Western domination and exploitation. So very interesting views. And then we also talked about the limitations of Islamic finance within the dollar system. And I already mentioned earlier, and then through interviews, and I also hear more detailed sort of elaborations about why there's a problem with Islamic finance and then why cryptocurrencies seem to be a better alternative, and then it can solve some problems. And then another thing that emerged, I think probably the most interesting to me, is when the interviewees talk about cryptocurrency as a divine alternative. Talk about cryptocurrency as operating and with algorithm. So then they call this as a mathematical constitution. And this mathematical constitution is not manipulated and then will not be contaminated by human desire or greed, and then it's purely mathematical. And then so in that sense, it's quite, a very sacred system. It's a divine system. It has this kind of a nature of on its own. And so they're very passionate about it because it offers a new approach and to really sort of exert fairness, justice, that aligns with the Islamic value. And then there's something else, and then that emerged out of those interviews. And then, for example, some people talk about cryptocurrency as something that non-existent because it's sort of, it just flow in this digital space. But then for these practitioners, for these entrepreneurs, traders, developers, they do not share that opinion. They argue Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, they are ethical model of wealth because they are actually tangible, and then their tangibility is because it's energy backed, right? So you need to have electricity to kind of mine the coin. So it's actually realistic. It's not made out of thin air. So for them, this is one very important aspect of the tangibility, which is again something quite controversial when Islamic scholars talk about cryptocurrencies, and then the critiques, and then they will argue that energy is something that can create issue. For example, the computational work and electricity consumption is going to create problems. Maybe it's going to add pressure on the environment, and what they're gonna do with sustainability issues. So some of these issues cannot be it's still in the process of discussion, debate, and it's not really resolved. But it's interesting to hear these individuals talk about these issues and then offer their opinions. And then there's also a little bit more about this interesting way to reconstruct a grand alternative narrative and reimagine global connectivity through cryptocurrencies. Our respondents frequently draw historical parallels to highlight the revolutionary potential they see in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. For example, by comparing Bitcoin's emergencies to the introduction of paper currency, they frame cryptocurrency as a transformative development that could redefine global finance, establish a fairer and a more equitable system in line with Islamic values. And then they feel that the logic is quite self-evident because, again, this is an invention, and there's also a transformative invention. Then I don't think I have that much time left, but just to conclude this, I just wanted to share a little bit from our conclusion. But this is still, even though the paper is kind of is ready, but we are really interested in expanding this study to look at how religion play a role in cryptocurrency. Probably not just among Chinese Muslims, because there's also a lot of participants in this business in Dubai, interestingly, not just the Chinese Muslims, but also the Han Chinese, the non-Muslim business people, as well as expat Muslims from all over the world, especially from the West, and then the Malaysian Muslims are also big players. So that's our plan. But a little bit of reflection about the methods and then studying these mobile minorities in transnational space. The interesting thing is that even though they are very mobile, but then we also found that they tend to settle in some of these global cities. So I think in the future, if we wanted to study Chinese Muslims, especially the Muslims who have kind of gathered in outside China, some of these key nodes of global trade and logistics, transportation will be quite interesting as a new site for research. Dubai is one, obviously, and Kuala Lumpur will be another one. There will be some other locations in Europe, maybe, and then somewhere in Turkey. So some of these places could become new research sites to understand and how people migrates and where they go. But I mean, it's interesting that all these people that we interviewed are quite mobile. They move across a long distance. They're not just traveling between China and the UAE. They also spend time in North America and Africa, in Southeast Asia, right? So they are very mobile. And in conclusion, what we trying to argue here is that, by looking at the experiences of these Chinese Muslim Bitcoiners, and then we sort of, better understand how the Muslims, and especially the minorities operating in this modern society, right, deal with various challenges with secularity. But there's one thing that we find that's quite interesting. Probably, future research could help to resolve that issue. When we look at cryptocurrencies and then some of these other sort of new technologies, we find that the entrepreneurship is largely male dominated. We don't really see any women in the field, and we rarely hear their voice. And we're not quite sure if they're just generally absent from these innovative enterprises, or they are just somewhere that beyond reach of our network so far. So these are some of these limitations we wanted to deal with in the future. I think I'm going to stop here, and then I will be happy to answer questions later on. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Yuting. Now it's time for our last presentation of the webinar. So I would like to introduce to you Susan McCarthy, who is a professor of political science at Providence College in Rhode Island. Her research examines the politics of ethnicity and religion in China. Among the questions animating her work is how minority ethnic and religious groups seize opportunities created by the Chinese government's policies to pursue cultural and religious objectives, often in ways that support regime goals. She is the author of Communist Multiculturalism, Ethnic Revival in Southwest China, published in 2009. Along with articles and book chapters on these topics. So now I will turn over to Professor McCarthy.
Thank you very much. Aloha. And thank you, Jonathan and Nii, for this great opportunity. So let me share my screen. Wait, hang on just a moment. Okay, can you see my, you see the images there?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so yes, my talk is called Chinese Muslim Adaptive Innovation in the New Era. And oops, sorry, just one moment. These four images, as you can tell, there's a similarity between the top two, a similarity between the bottom. These on the ones on the left are before Sinicization. The ones on the left, on the right, are after Sinicization. And these are related to a project that I am going to talk about today called World Muslim City. But let me start by noting that, as especially Ruslan's research makes clear, these are very difficult times for Muslims in the People's Republic of China. And after decades really of fairly relaxed and even supportive treatment of Islam by the Chinese government, policies towards Muslims and towards Islam have tightened. Obviously the Uyghurs in Xinjiang and other Turkic minorities have really felt the brunt of this, but the Hui have obviously also been affected. Now, during this period, it's not just policy, but also public opinion, official rhetoric. These have become increasingly critical, even hostile, toward Chinese Muslims and toward expressions of Islam. However, precarity is nothing new for Muslims in China, and preserving the Islamic faith and Muslim communities, Muslim identity, has long required creative, adaptive innovation. And these adaptations include, things what Matthew Erie has called deep borrowings from the dominant Chinese culture. And many of these borrowings have tried to make Islam and Muslims more acceptable, more palatable to the wider non-Muslim state and society, while again enabling Muslims to not only hang on to, but to really develop their religion. Of course, scholarship by Professor Yuting Wang and Professor Frankel have shown, really how these have enriched the religious life of Chinese Muslims and spurred the development of a distinctly Chinese Islam. Now, the present moment would seem to demand similarly innovative adaptations for Chinese Muslims, but policies like sinicization can make such adaptations more difficult because they make toxic really or dangerous some of the strategies that Muslims have been using for decades, to really preserve and promote their faith in some maybe unconventional ways. So I've been thinking about this question of what might Chinese Muslim adaptive innovation look like now and going forward. What might that require really, or depend on in this new era under Xi Jinping, the era of sinicization? Now, I don't have an answer to that question, but what I want to do today is discuss the sort of recent example of what I think can be viewed as Muslim adaptive innovation. That is this case of World Muslim City, because it's an example of how Hui Muslims in the autonomous region, the province of Ningxia, use political, economic, cultural opportunities created by official policies and politics to really pursue distinctly Muslim objectives related to faith, related to the Ummah, related to Islamic education, and so on. So when Jonathan asked me to participate in this webinar, he brought up an article that I recently published in Comparative Studies in Society and History. And that's titled Sinicizing China's World Muslim City, Spatial Politics, National Narratives, and Ethno-Religious Assimilation in the PRC. But I'm not going to repeat the entire argument of that article here today. Maybe some of you have read it, would be great. But I bring it up because I do think that it exemplifies, Muslim adaptive innovations that were suited to the constraints and possibilities of the Hu Jintao era, or the Hu Jiang era, perhaps the Jiang Zemin Hu Jintao era. So this project really came about because of the efforts, partly grassroots, but also connected to the provincial level authorities who were Hui Muslim. And they were really trying to grasp the opportunities created by these official initiatives, government initiatives. And these included, their Muslim-centric goals, I argue, included things like strengthening Muslims, Hui Muslims' own knowledge of their faith, of their history. They wanted to forge closer connections to Muslims worldwide. Now, as some of you may know, World Muslim City today is basically defunct. A few of its projects remain. I can talk about that later, but they remain in altered form. They've been sinicized. So its demise is partly a consequence of sinicization, partly a consequence of this increasingly restrictive and arguably Han-centric understanding of the Chinese nation. What the demise of this project, I argue in that the article I just published is linked to the spatial politics of Xi Jinping's revisionist nationalism. So the Chinese nation is not simply an idea, but it's something to be concretized, quite literally and concrete in the built environment of a city. And I also argue, though, that sinicization is not the only cause of this, and I'll explain a bit later that this had to do with some really mundane issues around, land use and other issues. And so the shutting down of World Muslim City was motivated in part by this broader project of Xi's effort to, what I say, defrag the fragmented authoritarian state. and to assert party control. But yeah, so, the thing with World Muslim City as this exemplar of adaptive innovations, I argue that these made sense for the Hu Jintao era. They did harness Muslim culture, identity, and whatnot for various projects. They linked up with Open Up the West, the Going Out Project, BRI. And this image here on the right on the screen, this is actually a book that came out in, I'm going to say 2014. These books were published for every province that was involved in the Open Up the West campaign. And so this is the Ningxia version. It's Shibu Da Kaifa, Open Up the West. And I like that the Ningxia version includes this photograph of this building that looks kind of like the Taj Mahal. This is actually a gatehouse into a theme park, a Muslim theme park in Ningxia. And surprise, surprise, this has also been Sinicized. This was not part of World Muslim City, but it was a similar project. It was actually an earlier project and very much an inspiration for World Muslim City. All right, so what was World Muslim City? First of all, I wanted to show you all this map of Ningxia, which, in the article, I say it's kind of analogous to South Dakota, even in climate and, sort of geography in some ways. It's smack in the middle of China and yet in the middle of nowhere in some ways. It's long been quite poor and backward. But this was this regional development project. And it was justified as this effort and kind of promoted as this effort to turn Ningxia into this bridgehead of a Sino-Arab trade and a fulcrum for the Belt and Road and whatnot. And it was tied to these other endeavors like the establishment of the China Arab States Expo, there are a whole bunch of like China Arab trade fairs and technology fairs and the like. And some of these have been set permanently in Incheon, the capital of Ningxia. So this was also about building up this region to make it more hospitable to foreigners coming for these fairs, especially those from the Muslim world, from North Africa and the Middle East. Now, World Muslim City was also really a kind of real estate venture. And I note that there were really two versions of this. There's what I call World Muslim City 1.0 and World Muslim City 2.0. And the first version, which was launched in 2009, it had a budget of about 800 million yuan. Get to that in a moment, but I do want to stress that Islamic and Muslim objectives and aesthetics and ideas and the whole idea of Ningxia as a Muslim region was really central to World Muslim City, but also central to these broader efforts to promote, say, the Sino-Arab trade fairs and the like. So yeah, this was all about helping to develop the economy of Ningxia. There's been a fair amount written on this topic. Wyatt Ho, for instance, has argued that officials in Ningxia were actually very hesitant for a long time to kind of mobilize Muslim resources for various purposes, but by the mid-2000s, this seemed to be more doable. So this involved really kind of mobilizing the Muslim aesthetics and the like. So what was this really? Oh, wait, hang on a second. I do want to stress, so this was not a single city, but it was a multi-sided endeavor. And some funding for the original World Muslim City came from donors and investors in Kuwait, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, other Muslim countries. Kuwait in particular was a source of capital. Land for charitable and educational components of World Muslim City, it's not just about business, but land for some of these projects was actually given free or allocated free by the county government. So World Muslim City attempted to combine the pursuit of profit with philanthropy. And so this image here, it's actually from a website that I found in the Internet Archive. You can't find it just on the internet, but you can go to the archive and find it. And so World Muslim City, the first version, you had these projects planned, like you would have a pedestrian mall with shops and pavilions featuring the arts and handicrafts from all these Muslim nations. It was going to have housing for displaced Hui villagers, an Arabic language college, an orphanage. There was also something planned, a World Islamic History Museum, the second floor of which was going to be a mosque. And so here you have this rendering of what it was going to look like. This is actually from a GIF, so it's not a very good image. But you can see like it's very lush and it's surrounded by water on three sides, and you've got the mosque at the center. You've got the college up in the kind of the center right there. You can see the track. So yeah, this looks like what this shows you what it was intended to look like at completion. Here's another view of it, which I don't quite understand how these views line up, but so be it. And I really like this rendering of what the mosque was going to look like. Where do I have my description? Basically, the mosque was like going to be this four-sided domed building, and the four sides would be open books, open versions of the Quran. And it would have, oh, I have the number somewhere. It would have the same number of windows in it as chapters in the Quran, and it would be supported by 5 pillars naturally. So again, this was really, really Muslim-y or Muslim-esque or Islamic-y or whatever you want to say. They were not shy about trying to mobilize Muslim or pseudo-Muslim aesthetics. So very quickly, and I won't get too much into this now, but basically the first World Muslim City 1.0 ran into all sorts of financial difficulties. It had to do with land use. They hadn't gotten the proper certifications to develop the land, or even gotten the transfer of land, which was rural land, before they started building. And they couldn't get financing. They didn't get enough money from the Middle East. They needed loans. They had to go to the Middle East for loans because it had to be interest free, of course. But they couldn't get them because they had no collateral. Anyway, it looked like the whole thing was defunct. Eventually, the deputy party secretary / governor of Ningxia, the Ningxia autonomous region, helped facilitate really a sale of this project to a Beijing-based company that does like tourism and light shows and various things. So they took it over. And so once they took it over, the budget expanded to like 23 billion yuan, about 3.6 billion US dollars. And even though this company was not run by Muslims, had nothing really to do with Muslims, they did promise to maintain this sort of Islamic aesthetic and focus. And so here you have some of the structures that were actually built. So on the right, this is the Ningxia International Hall, which still stands. And so this hall was quite consciously designed. It has this mesh exterior, which performs a kind of cooling function. It's very modern and sleek and abstract. But that mesh structure was meant to kind of evoke the hats and veils of the Hui people and the checkered head coverings worn throughout the Middle East. On the left, you have one of the structures on the Sino-Arab axis. That's also the same boulevard where that dome, gazebo, and the crescent moon you saw at the very beginning are located. So in the end, Sanshen ran into problems also. It was way over budgeted, very grandiose. They couldn't get the money anyway. It seemed in many ways like a kind of typical grandiose speculative land deal. They also ran into problems because they too didn't abide by the law. They started constructing buildings on land that they hadn't actually gotten proper title to and use rights for. They built an eco park, which was in fact a golf course, and new golf courses have been illegal in China since about 2004. So, they went back and forth. So there were all sorts of shenanigans here that, again, I see this as very much of a piece with the Jiang Hu era, the era of fragmented authoritarianism, the era of rapid growth, the era of looking the other way while local officials and local business people do all sorts of deals. And so World Muslim City failed, but it failed for a lot of mundane reasons. Yes, Sinicization had some impact on it, but some of the affected structures, like the Sino-Arab axis, were actually not directly connected to religion. And I just want to highlight here that that China still promotes Sino-Arab Muslim friendship, but one thing we see today is that the kind of deliberate, overt, open mobilization of Muslim culture seems to be over. But one thing I was thinking about World Muslim City, and I definitely think we need to sort of look at Sinicization to understand what has happened to it in the overall. We need to understand sort of this increasingly rigid view of the Chinese nation and what it means to be Chinese as a factor here. But I was very much influenced by Nan Laicao's article from 2017, where he writes about the cross removal campaign in Zhejiang in 2016, and he makes the argument that this wasn't just about religion, but it was very much about a kind of rectification of the party state and an imposition by the party of its secular vision on society and literally on space, on buildings, on cityscapes. So back to this question I started with, and on the right here you see the same, the pergolas here, the walkway on the left. Those metal structures were removed and they were replaced by these nice slope-roofed versions that I guess are more Chinese. But yeah, so back to adaptive innovation, the new era. Commerce, trade, education, charity, all of these endeavors, which really surged in the post-Mao era, these all provided opportunities for Muslims to both, get rich, get an education, but also forge links to the Muslim world and learn more about their religion. These were adaptive innovations. We're likely to see different strategies going forward. And again, I'm not sure what those will be. It seems that because of Sinicization, because of the party building and the defragging of the party state, business and political and diplomatic resources are not as available for Muslims to use to sort of pursue these dual goals. And I was also thinking, as I was putting this together, about Alexander Stewart's, he has a chapter in a edited volume by Richard Madsen on Sinicization, and he talks about how he argues that among some Chinese Muslims, they almost, I don't know if they welcome Sinicization, but they kind of think, okay, great, now we can get back to the real focus of Islam, which should be faith and a kind of interiority and a purification of all these extraneous external elements that at the end of the day have nothing to do with the Quran. And so in a sense, interiority and orthodoxy are a kind of adaptive response to the pressures that many Muslims are under in the People's Republic of China. So as to other possibilities, I end with a question mark. Would love to entertain or hear what you have to say. So maybe we can do this in the comments conversation. So anyway, that's the end of my talk. So thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Susan. So at this time, having concluded the three presentations, first, I'd like to thank all three presenters for these very thought-provoking, really interesting, and I would say cutting-edge ways of looking at the situation of Islam in China. I think the three presentations work very well together, and I will open the floor to questions in just a moment, but I will take advantage of the moderator's prerogative to ask a few questions of my own. So I'll do it in order of who presented first. So I have a question for Ruslan. So I'm really interested, first of all, the terminology that you give us, I think is very novel. And, the idea of maiming and amputation and prosthetics, these are all very visceral ways of describing the situation. But I have a practical question in terms of the material that you shared with us. All of these really interesting images, where you describe the amputations and so in my experience, these types of before and after images are being wiped away from the internet. There's a methodical and systematic, it seems, campaign to do away with these images. So on the one hand, if you're willing to share, I wonder where you're getting these photocopied images, um, and also. Why do you think that the government, I mean, I have my own reasons, but I'd like to know your opinion of why the government doesn't want the global public to see the efforts and the results of synicization? If it's such a, it's a, I would think that maybe they would take pride in this, but of course, I know that there are different policies for different audiences. So could you speak to those two questions?
Do you plan to voice all the questions to all the panelists, or we should respond one by one?
Oh, I think because the topics are different, I just wanted to ask
Okay.
one question of each of you.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this very insightful comment. So the before and after images, the graphic slides, the comparisons were part of the government document that was actually internal, but it was leaked online in 2020 by the Western press. And it's still available online. You can download it. Now, in terms of the online space, now that is really messy, and I totally kind of happy that you pointed this out. So there was a book that was published in 2014 on the mosques in Qinghai, advertising these mosques as symbols of ethnic unity, obviously, as touristic spaces. And so it comes together with Dongguan Mosque, which is like a big monumental mosque with domes and minarets that was so-called Arabized in 1999. Now, the government website, qinghai.gov, government website still contains the reference to that book and still advertises the book with that very image of the mosque. So although the mosque itself is no longer look the same, the kind of that it's still there. So that's kind of it's interesting, the dynamics of campaign that I think you point out in the question of why. And I think at this point, my only answer is that the governments, the local governments, the prefectural, the county governments, because they were so enthusiastic about drawing on mobilizing, as Susan said, right, kind of a drawing on this difference, right, in order to advertise to the kind of a Beijing mandate that we're building this ethnic unity, kind of a minority unity city, that they were also affected by the campaign and they just don't know like how to navigate it. And so even the process that I highlighted in internal document, only one mosque has these gazebos and pagodas, right? But then when you look at the Google images of all these mosques, almost all of them have the gazebos and pagodas, right? You see the unfolding of this campaign, which says that in the beginning, nobody actually quite knew what synicization means, right? What synicization should look like, what a Chinese mosque should look like. And so that's why I think it's this in haphazard manner that you go into internet and you will be able to still find the images of all these mosques in their kind of earlier form.
So just to follow up and using Susan's terminology, the defragmentation is not anywhere near complete.
Yeah, certainly, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Ruslan. And then Yuting. So yes, you're right that this topic you and I have been, we've been discussing for a long time. And I wonder, one of the things that that comes to my mind, besides the environmental questions, with the amount of electricity and the heat that's generated from the servers that are necessary to keep up the blockchain. I still have a question, since some of your informants have talked about how, Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies are, they have a certain divine quality and that they are perfectly just because there's no way to manipulate them. But has anyone among that you know of, have there been Muslim critics to say that, well, Bitcoin is not exactly universally just, because you still have to have a certain amount of wealth to be able to get into the trade. You have to have a certain educational level to be able to have facility with the technology. Even the electricity, right? Who pays the electric bills? People with money have an advantage. Are there any Muslim critics who address these issues?
Absolutely. And the topic of cryptocurrency is highly controversial. But in my research, what I've heard is that these are highly idealistic individuals and who are looking for alternatives. So they have actually attempted to seek out or to establish, right, a grand narrative to project a very positive light on cryptocurrencies. And even within the Muslim community, whether the Chinese Muslim or others, there are different voices, right? And so these people who practice cryptocurrencies, they are, I wouldn't call them avant-garde or pioneer, but then they're certainly a minority, right? And then they're trying to convince others. So they're sort of like the missionaries going out there, trying to promote, this ideal module that, in their perspective, right, would provide probably the best form. But then they never said, this is going to be perfect. They did say that, there seemed to be a better way to do things for the sake of this is a lesser evil, if you wanted to compare this with other models out there. And what they emphasize the most is how this model could actually challenge the Western domination. I think this is very much a post-colonial way of thinking, that we need to challenge the Western model. So let's leave other small issues like, electricity, heat, and other problems to the side, but focus on what it can actually accomplish. So I find that quite fascinating. It just, the way that they present the project to others and trying to convince others. But like I said, it's a small group. And even in terms of the subscribers, 10,000, 50,000 is still quite small compared to, more traditional, conventional, even the Islamic finance, right? Many, many more people are still, doing the traditional way. But it's just interesting that how they interpret it, the technology, and then how this mathematical constitution can actually achieve that divinity. Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know if that answers your question, but certainly, yeah, there are, because in our research, we didn't really try to understand the nitty-gritties of Islamic finance or cryptocurrency. We're actually more interested in how they perceive, right, this system, how they approach these new technologies, innovative technologies. But because they're minorities, I think they are under certain kind of pressure, especially in the case of Chinese Muslims, to find ways to circumvent a lot of those controls, right? So this seemed to be a good method, at least, strategic one and pragmatic one, to solve their problems, like, how you're going to transfer your wealth for Hajj, to operate businesses outside. And I saw there's another question about riba. We didn't actually really go into that depth to look at the operational aspect of Islamic finance and cryptocurrency. So our analysis is more sort of on the theoretical level. So I think it's a strength, but it's also a weakness. So I would really love to go deeper and then to look at some other, interesting topics that we need to know more about. Yeah.
Yeah, well, as I said, I do really I think this falls into the category of what Susan called these new adaptive approaches or methods. And in that regard, it's really interesting because it's, it's another kind of survival mechanism. But I really do. I would love to. I wish you would go further and deeper, because I would love to know about the resistance or the pushback against it in among Muslims, among jurists, and among ordinary people. Yeah. So thanks for that.
Next project.
Yes, yes, keep going. And Susan, you know, when I read your introduction, you talked about one of the main questions that you ask is how ethnic minorities sometimes or religious minorities as well sees opportunities created by government policy, and that often there's almost a symbiosis, right,
Oh, yeah.
of the government interests and this constituency's interests. But that sounds like it's something that belongs to the Hu or the Jiang Hu era more than the Xi Jinping era. And so do you agree with that, number one? And number two, in this new era, at the level of official discourse, how is the change explained, you know, by the government?
What change?
Oh, the change in this kind of symbiotic relationship where both, you know, the minority and the government benefit
Yeah.
to this new era where it seems that it's much more controlled by government interests.
Well, everyone benefits when the party is in control. Let's get that out of the way. You know, I think. So first of all, I'm glad you asked it about the symbiosis, because that's actually what I was. You know, I was also thinking about that issue, that the adaptive innovations are on both sides. You know, the Chinese regime, you know, beginning with Deng Xiaoping, this recognition that we can't keep suppressing minorities and religion. We've got it. You know, the people are fed up. So kind of, you know, allowing religion to flourish, letting people have their mosques and temples and churches and whatnot. That was part of the kind of rebuilding of the party's legitimacy and authority after the Cultural Revolution, after Mao. And so we had several decades of that. You know, some of this may just come down to the idiosyncrasies of individuals who made it into high position. People like, what's his name, Ma Rong, the Hui Muslim advocate of Minzu Ronghe, you know, ethnic fusion. So there's been a group of elites, educated elites, professors, academics, and whatnot, who have said that, you know, our old minority policy isn't working. And I find that kind of silly, because, you know, actually it was working pretty well. It's just that you didn't do it very well in places like Xinjiang, where you never really gave them an opportunity. You know, those were areas where, and Tibet too, that's where you saw these uprisings in the late 2000s. That became a kind of justification for, you know, going all in on, you know, Sinicizing all of China and making sure the party was in charge. So I feel like the system was kind of working. And so, you know, one of the arguments that political scientists make is that, you know, Xi Jinping's effort to, as I say, defrag the fragmented authoritarian system is actually making it much less nimble, much less. I mean, yeah, he is tackling corruption, but it's making the system less able to encourage experimentation and local innovation in all sorts of areas, and that those were reasons for China's rapid growth and development. So you know, I sort of view this as again, yeah, certainly there's a lot of Islamophobia and anti-Muslim sentiment here, but I see it as linked to these broader issues as well, and you know, have a lot to do with Xi Jinping's own personal vision of how the party ought to rule China, and how China, all of society, needs to fall in line. And I make the point in my article that in some ways the targets of Sinicization are local party and state officials, or they're one of the targets, and that there's at the very end of my article, I talk about the kind of rituals of Sinicization, the rituals being lopping off of domes, you know, making people raise the flag at mosques, that that the participation, it's a, who cares if people believe in it, as long as they perform these rituals, you know, they're showing that they obey the party state. They're demonstrating their loyalty. And so you know, again, I don't think the party state tries to necessarily justify it points to things like what happened in Xinjiang and Tibet, and these, you know, periodic bombings and the like, that, you know, as justifications for clamping down. And so again, I don't know if that's a good answer, but there's just an assumption that this is what China needs going forward. So
Sure. Well, that's kind of what I thought too. So anyway, having asked those questions, I wonder in the audience, are there any questions for our speakers, either individually or as a panel?
Yes, audience members can use the Q&A feature. There's still yeah, Yuting, I don't know if you want to the other half of the question about
Sure.
dealing with entrepreneurs and their relationship with China. So this is from Majuddin Ali. It says, given China's restrictive stance on cryptocurrency, how do these entrepreneurs manage to operate in crypto-friendly markets like the UAE while still maintaining business or personal ties with China?
Very good question. I think, you know, the interesting phenomenon here in the Gulf is that, you know, the market is open and the market maintains a very good relationship with many players, including China, of course, right? So because of this favorable environment, not just, you know, the friendly environment to cryptocurrency, but the favorable environment for Chinese businesses, companies, and it just, you know, really provided them with this space to operate. And because cryptocurrency is friendly in the UAE, and then because the operation is here in the UAE, so then as long as they abide by the UAE law, there's not a problem. So that's why I think, you know, Dubai became such an interesting place to study this small group of people. You know, certainly, you know, they are you know, they're capitalists, right? So they're trying to generate profit. And then they operate big businesses on multiple continents, and then it's not necessarily a bad thing as well for the Muslim community. And then, you know, for them, they do maintain good relationships as much as they can. And then, you know, there's also other options. I think, you know, in this transnational environment, and what I've just observed is that, you know, people become very resourceful, I would say, right? So there are ways around. I don't really know exactly what they do, because a lot of, you know, confidential things that they would never share with me. As a researcher, we can talk about something more general, right? The big picture about why they're doing this. And I think actually I am really thankful that I had access to some of them, you know, to hear their stories, because yeah, you know, it's not your everyday sort of topics for conversation, right? Especially profit making, you know, strategies. Yeah. But then based on what I know, they are able to maintain that. Yeah. Very interesting indeed. I'm sorry if I cannot really answer your question to that extent, but that's what I found through my research. And then, of course, you know, there's a lot of interesting aspects to explore. As I said earlier, I would really like to continue the study if possible.
We reached the bottom of the hour. I want to take this opportunity to thank our three speakers and our moderator. If this is your first time at a Center for Chinese Studies webinar, this happens every couple of weeks. Our next one will be in a couple of weeks on transparency and projection in medieval Buddhist sculpture. So it's with Dr. Kate Lingley in the Department of Art. So it's a very varied webinar series, but we're extremely grateful to have this on Islam in China today. And I know the recording will be a value for our students here for sure. This is something that they're burning to learn more about. So thank you so much for being here virtually, and hope to treat you all here someday in person as well.